We start with the question on everyone's mind on Wall Street this week. Just how bad might these tariffs turn out to be on the August 1st deadline? John D'Addario is CEO of the music company founded by his grandfather that bears his name.
We're dealing with it right now in a big way. For example, last year we estimate that the total amount in tariffs that we paid for both raw materials and finished goods that were imported in the U.S. To the tune of roughly about $700,000. Based on the incremental tariffs that we're dealing with this year, that's going to triple. It's going to be close to $2.2 million is what we're estimating by the end of the year we'll be paying in incremental tariffs. So that's a big threat to us.
D'Addario is the largest company in the world specializing in the design, manufacture, and distribution of accessories for musical instruments. Everything from strings for guitars and violins, to drumsticks and drum heads and snare wires for drums, to reeds and mouthpieces for woodwinds.
In this factory, we're producing 750,000 strings per day on average. We use a wide range of materials, both for the core or the foundation of the string, as well as wrap wires, which include nickel-plated steel, phosphor bronze, titanium, silver, and in some cases gold.
The company traces its origins to 17th century Italy, moving to the United States at the start of the 20th century.
In 1905, there was an earthquake in the town of Sale, and my great-grandfather, Charles D'Addario, emigrated to the U.S. at that time. And what he did is he imported strings from his family and sent money home to help them rebuild their homes, literally. And then when World War II came about, because of all the trade embargoes, he forced his hand to start making strings himself in his basement in Astoria, Queens. And my family's been making strings in the U.S. ever since.
So how big is your company in terms of employees?
In terms of employees, it's 1,100 globally, majority of which are here in Farmingdale, New York. Roughly about 800 of those 1,100 are based here in New York. And as far as revenue is concerned, we are roughly about $240 million annually.
So tell us about the inputs, first of all, as you manufacture strings, drumsticks, drum heads, reeds. Where do you get the materials?
It comes from a wide variety of locations. So starting with the reed business, we literally import the raw material from our own plantations, which are based in the south of France and in Argentina. So what we do is we harvest cane from our own fields in those countries, and we process them down into what we call splits, and then we ship those splits here into New York, where we process them into finished reeds. And then, when you look at the string business, we actually manufacture the majority of our own raw materials. We source steel rod from a variety of U.S. sources, and then we draw them down to fine sizes that we subsequently use to make strings. And then, of course, there's a very small percentage of our business. In fact, about 5% of our business represents finished goods that we source from overseas. 95% is what we make is in the States. But what we do source, of course, is predominantly from China, and it ranges from a variety of accessories like tuners and capos and instrument cables. And so that's, again, a small part of our business, but a very important part of our business.
That's on the input side. What about the outputs? How much of your product do you sell in the United States? How much overseas?
So roughly 50-50 U.S. and international. And what we do internationally is we actually distribute our products in over 130 countries around the world. And many of those markets, we actually have our own distribution company established where we have sales, marketing people on the ground, and we have our own logistics operations. So, in fact, our own distribution companies internationally control about 50% of our international business in totality.
Given D'Addario's dependence on imports and exports, it's no surprise that dealing with new tariffs can have a profound effect on its business. But John D'Addario and his colleagues are figuring out ways to cope with the changes.
Fortunately, though, we've done some hard work on onshoring a lot of products that we previously sourced overseas. So, for example, just before the pandemic, we started our own injection molding factory here in New York. And ever since, we've been gradually bringing products back from China to the States. So we did that before COVID. During COVID, because of all the supply chain disruptions, it actually forced us to accelerate the onshoring of things, and that's continued until now. So it's this onshoring initiative that we've embarked on has really served us well, both through COVID as well as now through the trade war. Certainly, we're still running up against tariffs on products and raw materials that we still source, but definitely to a lesser extent.
One of the goals stated by the Trump administration of tariffs is to increase more onshoring, as it's called, really production here in the United States. What percentage of that tripling that you talked about in your costs do you think you can take care of by onshoring?
I definitely think there's more opportunities to onshore additional products and additional parts. I think we could pretty much cut that tariff bill in half if we put our minds to it. The thing is, though, most companies don't think that's possible. And what we've done is we've taken a hard look at the total cost of ownership of actually being in control of the manufacturing here. And at the end of the day, it really makes a lot more sense for us to do it here in terms of control and in terms of quality and of course, cost containment.
That reminds me of what happened, I think, during the pandemic, when companies, U.S. companies, had to redo their supply chains, and in some ways may have come out stronger. Do you think you may come out stronger because of the tariff pressures?
I totally think so. I mean, we looked at COVID not as a threat, but as an opportunity as a company. We're fortunate to have a very strong balance sheet, so it served us well in getting through COVID and made us a stronger company. And I definitely see this as an opportunity to do the same. And as I mentioned before, it's motivating us even more to onshore things that we can control and of course, then mitigate tariffs as a result.
Are you feeling margin pressure? Are you able to raise prices? How do you accommodate that?
It really depends because we go to market with such a wide variety of products. So in some cases, we could get away with a price increase to mitigate the impact of tariffs. In other cases, it's just too competitive for us to do that. So we sacrifice margin to retain our market share in those examples.
We've been talking about the effect of tariffs on inputs. What about exports? Because you do export, as you say, about 50% of your product. How might the trade disruptions actually affect your ability to export?
Well, you know, China is really a great example. 10 years ago, we started our own distribution company in Shanghai. The original objective of that distribution company was to help us mitigate counterfeiting of our strings. So we have a team of about a dozen people on the ground there that keep their eyes and ears open for counterfeits that are in market and really do a great job of controlling that. And so another reason why we started our own distribution company there is to be more competitive against Chinese brands. So when China imposed retaliatory tariffs on our products going into China, it was a major threat to our Chinese business. I mean, we're talking about a business that's anywhere between $5 and $10 million on an annual basis that suddenly is in jeopardy, and it made it difficult to compete with Chinese brands in market.
You have a successful business by all descriptions. It's not the biggest business in the United States. There are big publicly traded companies. How do you think your ability to respond to tariffs are different from some of the big publicly traded companies? Maybe better, maybe worse?
Well, you know, as a family business, one of the great things about it is we can be very nimble. We're not interested in the short-term, financial benefit. Our goal as a family is to have a sustainable, successful business for many generations. So having that mindset allows us to stay flexible, and we can pivot when we need to when the market conditions change.
D'Addario is just one example of a global company coming to terms with the Trump administration's new approach to trade.
Companies are trying to cope with the impact of the trade war.
Maxime Darmé is a senior economist at Allianz Trade, which recently surveyed 4,500 companies across China, the EU, the UK, and the US about how they are adapting to tariff uncertainty.
US firms are absorbing the cost into their margins. So we're not really seeing the impact on inflation. That being said, I think it's going to take very soon before we start to see some impact on US inflation. I think it's going to come very soon, by the fall at the latest, because now inventories are running super low. So, at some point, I think US retailers, US wholesalers, they are going to start to pass on the cost of the tariffs onto the consumers. All the more so, but now we have, tariffs are pretty much being settled with the EU, with Japan, perhaps soon with Korea. So now businesses start to know more or less what is going to be the set tariffs, 15% for the EU, 15% for Japan, 10% for the UK. So now companies have more visibility. So they will start to really pass on slowly into the prices, the tariffs.
So as firms look to adjust their supply chains, is one of the alternatives actually manufacturing onshore in the United States, which was, after all, President Trump's goal?
It is, yeah. Well, it's really hard to say at this point whether this goal will succeed, right? It will take many years. What I can say is, businesses tend to make the decisions, their investment decisions over a long time horizon. So who knows it's going to be after President Trump? Maybe all these tariffs are going to be removed, or some of these tariffs will be removed by the next president or the next administration. So I'm quite skeptical, that, a full-blown reshoring will happen into the United States. That being said, potentially, I think we could see a couple of sectors starting to reshore a little bit. So we could see some success happening in the next couple of years.
As companies reroute their supply chains, particularly when it comes from China through a third country in the United States, does that mean some countries are benefiting actually from the tariffs because they're getting more business?
China is going to remain central stage to the supply chains, to the manufacturing supply chains. But other countries in Southeast Asia, perhaps a little bit in Europe as well, and North Africa as well, could benefit, could really gain a little bit of value added, if it makes sense.